Well, three women will not be getting their day before the Supreme Court in one of the more unusual 14th Amendment cases. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the case comes under the perhaps hashtag campaign is better known than the court case itself, otherwise known as Free the Nipple. There are three women who were in violation of a city ordinance in a town called Laconia, New Hampshire. And they violated the city's ordinance, which required that that covering must be over the female breast, and that the covering specifically over the nipple area must be opaque. And their claim was that this was unfair and unconstitutional because it was not equally applied to men. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court this week has decided not to take up this case, therefore letting stand the New Hampshire Supreme Court ruling. And Bill, I bring this up not because it's of the prurient nature, but because it raises some really interesting constitutional questions and questions about how this country has sort of evolved legally and how it hasn't. Bill, specifically the New Hampshire Supreme Court said that nudity is also banned for men. However, the definition of nudity for men and women is different, and that the definition for female nudity fits with the traditional understanding thereof, or actually for both of them, fits with the traditional understanding. So, Bill, first of all, what do you think of this kind of on the basis of the doctrine of federalism, or the idea of letting decisions be made at the lowest possible level, in this case, a city ordinance?
I'm certainly in favor of that, but the fundamental issue here is much deeper than either federal, state, or local issue. The fundamental issue here is that this country cannot function unless there's some kind of common sense left in the bag. If you decide that you're going to challenge every single common sense assumption, especially at the level of the Supreme Court, then this country ceases to function. Then you need a constitution that's not 4,440 words long, one that's 400,000 or 4 million or 40 million words long, because without common sense, every single possible outcome of human behavior has got to be codified and regulated and standardized. And the fact that the Supreme Court even let it go up to the point where they were considering hearing it is quite a surprise to me. But although in this day and age, it's actually not. Well, I don't think it was the Supreme Court necessarily that brought this case on. I mean, obviously, it went through the New Hampshire Supreme Court. The appeal continued up to the next level. Bill, it's interesting that the women were protesting what they call the sexual objectification of women. And it seems that they think that if women were more often seen without their shirts on, that sexual objectification would be reduced. And so essentially they're engaged in a kind of political speech here by taking their tops off. And yet you seem to think that is a violation of common sense. If you were to take 100 women out to a beach, these three women included, and force them to remove their tops, 97 of those 100 women would suddenly start to feel like they've been objectified as sex objects. So the fact that you can find three people that are contrary to anything in this universe is not hard. The part that's hard to understand is the unbelievable willingness of this entire society, out of a profoundly deep sense of generosity and decency, to try to accommodate as many people as possible. But if the women are claiming that the fact that that the law requires them to wear a bikini top instead of just the bikini bottom, if these women are claiming that the fact that they have to wear the bikini top objectifies them, then simply write an ordinance that says that you're not allowed to wear it under any circumstances, and then see who feels objectified. This is the definition of common sense. Is it a complete understanding among the sane people of society that there are standards and we all agree on them, and they go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But in an age where your virtue is only determined by how much signaling you can do, which means how far away from ordinary, regular mores and social norms can you deviate, then this is the kind of thing you get. And this is the exact same kind of thing as what we saw when they started removing nativity scenes from town squares all across the country. You've got a almost exclusively Christian population, and then one or two people, almost always atheists, decide that somehow this nativity display that's been here since before they were born, way before they were born, that they grew up with, suddenly is offensive to them, and they make a lot of noise, and they therefore get the city hall to take the nativity scene down from the public square, and the noisiest people get all the attention, and all of these cowards in the various bureaucracies involved in any of these issues simply bow down and say, well, we don't want to be considered this or that or this or that or this or that. And that's what you get when you have large percentage of the population that doesn't believe in anything.
Now, Bill, the interesting perspective here from the Supreme Court view of things is that the court did not make a decision. They didn't rule on it. They just let it stand. They let the lower court ruling stand. I could imagine a scenario where on some future occasion, the town of Laconia gets a different board of supervisors, let's say, or councilmen or whatever they're governed by, who decides to define nudity down and say, well, as long as everybody's wearing something on their bottoms, the tops can be exposed. And I could see some citizen filing a grievance against that and mounting a court case. Would you agree at that point that the Supreme Court should also not weigh in on that? In other words, there should be no national standard for whether or not women have to wear something covering their breasts.
There is a national standard in place for this already. And I mentioned it at the beginning of the segment. It is common sense, custom, propriety, and every other word that actually has meaning, no matter how archaic it may sound. Decency, all of these things. There's not like there's no ruling on this. It's not like, gee, what do we do? Here's a problem we've never faced before. These are agitators who are trying to upset every single cultural norm that this society has, or any society, by the way, has. Virtually any society has. By deciding that they're going to use the First Amendment as a bludgeon, not as a shield. And this is what you get when you allow the crazy people to have all the time on television. This is the world you end up with. You would not want the
Supreme Court to weigh in and say, no, the local town can't define nudity down. We do have standards. We do have what you call common sense, and women should keep their tops covered.
Look, not only do I think the Supreme Court should have nothing to do with it, first of all, if a local community were to pass it, I would be astonished if that were to be the case. But if they did, then I still think it ought to be opposed on the basis of fundamental human decency and custom, if for nothing else. Now, look, if you want to have a nudist beach, that's fine with me. As a matter of fact, I think it's swell. But that's something you should have on a private beach in a secluded area, because not everybody feels the way that you do. When we're dealing with things that happen in the commons, out in public, the standards for behavior are very different than the standards at home. I don't care what these women do at home. I honestly don't. I don't care what they do in clubs. I don't care what they do on beaches. I don't care about any of that, except for when it comes into the public sphere. And then all of a sudden I get a say because I'm a member of the general public, and so is everybody else. And this, again, this use of the First Amendment as a bludgeon to destroy, intentionally, to destroy the cultural norms of this society just because they're there.
Well, and in this case, Bill, I brought up the First Amendment, but the real case they're making is a 14th Amendment case that they should have equal treatment under the law. And they're trying to blow this up from the local level to the national level by saying, look, you can't have a government in one state that is discriminating in a way that is not shared by all states. So they were trying to push this up to the national level to get some kind of ruling that basically said, let's stop objectifying women. And frankly, Bill, there are other countries and other cultures where toplessness among women is not considered to be a sexual display.
Then they can move there.
I think they like America because they like to be able to do yoga.
No, they clearly don't because no, I don't think they do like America, Scott. This is where I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one. I think that the people who would do something like this consider America to be a backwards, puritanical, island of uptightness against which their holy mission is to prevail. And I don't think they like America much at all. And if they really do want to have this opportunity, I've got, if you'll pardon the expression, I don't have any skin in this game. So if they want to do that in private, that's their business. But in public, we have to go with the same standards of common decency, which is why we don't drop F-bombs on this show. It's not that I don't know how to, and it's not even that I don't do it. I do it quite a lot. I don't do it on the air because on the air, I'm not limited by my own particular behaviors in the privacy of my own home. When I'm on the air, I have to worry about the propriety and the feelings and the sensitivity of people other than myself. And I'm not talking about people who get triggered at things. We talk about anything we want to on this show. But there are standards of decency that I feel I need to uphold and that I want to uphold. Could I argue them away? Absolutely, I could argue them away. I could absolutely argue them away. But I'm not going to because they're important.
Bill, there's, I think, just in closing here, something fascinating about a country that has a system of jurisprudence where 3 women who were fined $100 each, a suspended fine, by the way. They weren't forced to pay the $100 based on as long as they continue in good behavior, they won't have to pay the $100. But isn't it, I guess, kind of wonderful that we have a country where these 3 women, as an act of so-called political protest, could get a case to go all the way up to the level of at least being considered by the U.S. Supreme Court, but certainly they already had their day in court in New Hampshire. Doesn't that kind of encourage you in a way that this is possible in the United States, that these average people with a small grievance can escalate that to the constitutional level? I'm not being facetious.
No, I don't know. I know you're not. I know you're being completely serious, and I'm being serious in thinking about it. I don't think that does make me feel good. And I'll tell you why. Because if this kind of thing is to be admired as one of the benefits of our society, then you've turned the Supreme Court from the extremely limited in terms of the number of cases that it can review. You've turned it from being the pinnacle of legal opinion into a publicity campaign. You've made it into a billboard. This has gone to the Supreme Court. You and I are having this conversation right now, not because it went to the court of Ventura County, but because it went to the Supreme Court, which means that somebody had to make a decision, probably a pretty quick one, to say, we're not going to cover this case this year. But by having it there, number one, you're taking up time reviewing it in the first place. And secondly, you are elevating something that is so clearly trivial and so clearly self-serving up to the standard of the Supreme Court. And that, to me, is another example of how the left succeeds by tearing everything down just by simply trying, when I say normalize, I mean, nothing remains above sea level. Everything has to be brought down to the same common denominator. And the Supreme Court, in my opinion, is not a billboard. It's not an advertising firm. It is a supposedly and generally speaking, a consistently august body of serious men and women who have spent their entire lives getting to a place where they now have to determine the legal status of some of the most complex and difficult issues in the world. And I think as a general rule, I've had plenty of problems with the courts. I have, like most conservatives have, and many liberals have. If liberals and conservatives are both upset at the court, they're doing something right. But as a general rule, given the number of Supreme Court cases that actually become controversial, I think they do a remarkably good job of evenly dispensing their view of justice. And to take something this obviously self-serving is not a sign of gee, what a healthy society we have. What would make me happy along the lines of what you outlined would be if there was a legitimate constitutional grievance, something serious, somebody not being admitted into a public building or something for whatever reason. And then a private citizen were to take that to the Supreme Court, that would be impressive, except that it happens all the time.
I just want to say this in advance of our May 15th through the 18th Royal Caribbean cruise for the fans and members at BillWhittle.com, that the fact that I will be wearing a long sleeve turtleneck swimsuit has nothing to do with expressing solidarity with the plaintiffs in this case. No, that's just the way I dress.
No, you're part of the staff, but you got to wear the company Speedo.
The company Speedo.
I put a lot of time to designing that.
You know,
getting the logo just right.
There are folks signing up right now. They go to BillWhittle.com or BillWhittleCruise.com and they click that and they book their cabin and they are signing up to be part of this cruise. Not just because there's some political pundits that you see here on your screen who are going to be there staging live productions of your favorite shows. Not just because of that. Of course, that's a great inducement, but also because, frankly, they want to be among the kind of people who would watch this kind of show. And so that, I think, is going to be the primary benefit of being part of this cruise. If you have not yet signed up for this, I don't know at what point they're going to start cutting that off, but I wouldn't want you to find out.
We got an email from the tour agency earlier today saying that, again, just last week, we just had a rash of signups. You know, it's really going very well. We're going to have a blast.
Excellent.
You don't want to read about that afterwards, do you?
So we'll have lots of laughter in the lap of luxury on the, I was going to say the high seas, but the Caribbean doesn't really get that high.
Yeah, not generally.
It's not exactly high seas. With the cruise to the Bahamas, we'll spend a day at Coco Cay, a private island, and just really have a great time. And you'll have wonderful fellowship, not only with the hosts of these shows, including our buddy Stephen Green, but also with your fellow members and fans of the program. So just go to BillWhittleCruise.com or BillWhittle.com and click that cruise link to sign up for that. We'd like to thank our friends over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, who have helped to make this show possible.
Great guys.
Along with our buddies at patreon.com/BillWhittle, who have been patrons of ours and are supporting this effort. And of course, it all comes down to the members at BillWhittle.com who contribute on a monthly and annual basis to make sure that this keeps going. And they've unlocked new levels of engagement by becoming members. They see parts of the website that you can't see unless
they've leveled up.
What's that?
They've leveled up.
They have leveled up, indeed. So it's time for you to level up. Go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.